Good afternoon. So it's very good. Everyone is getting a bit silent, please. Well, welcome to all of you. Your Excellency, Marion Jansen, Director of Trade of Agriculture. It's good to have you all here. I would like to welcome you on this side event on bioeconomy on behalf of the Netherlands and also on the OECD. And we work closely together in this kind of things. And my name is Guido Lantier. I'm Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, without changes in consumption, the increase in demand of bio-based raw materials for non-food applications towards 2050 is expected to grow with 960%. That's a tenfold for the Netherlands. And the ever-growing world population, reduction of fossil fuels, and the challenges in the areas of climate, nature, and environment demand shared efforts to create a fair bioeconomy. During today's discussion, we aim to address critical questions, such as how policy frameworks and public-private collaboration can help scale innovations, and how emerging standards can assure inclusivity in a sustainable supply chain. Transitioning from fossil-based raw materials to biogenic sources is critical for building a climate-neutral global economy. Recent innovations in biomanufacturing in synthetic biology offer promising opportunities to reuse agriculture-related residues. To face challenges and opportunities, a sustainable, circular, and climate-neutral economy is essential. We will have to make optimal use of crops for food, construction, clothing, chemicals, and other applications. It's vital that we ensure this transition benefits all stakeholders, from farmers to industries, and fostering inclusiveness along the supply chain. Farmers and producers form the basis for the production of biomaterials, which form the basis of its further applications. For this vision to become a success story, we will need an increase in effective and efficient bio-based applications. We need to make better use of raw materials to meet the increasing demand, and need to be more aware about the balance between using crops for food production and availability versus other multifunctional applications. So now it's time to adapt, and adapting we will, because it's what people do. Every now and then we reinvent ourselves, and we can succeed. We have to succeed. Therefore, the Netherlands is very proud and honored to co-host this panel at the GFFA, together with the OECD. We are glad to see so many representatives from so many different backgrounds and countries here with us today, uniting for a common cause to exchange views on actionable steps and practical solutions. And to the panelists, I wish you loads of insight and inspiration while building a future for all of us, a future based on sustainable agriculture, new food systems, and continuous focus on food security and a fair bioeconomy. I hope we can learn from each other. And learning from each other means that you speak out your ideas. And learning means also that you listen to each other. And for the rest, enjoy this meeting. Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce Marion Jansen. You're the Director of Trade and Agriculture of the OECD. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guido Lanter, for this introduction. What a pleasure for us to organize this session together with the Netherlands. For me, personally, a big pleasure. Some of you may have noticed that even though I'm German, my name sounds very Dutch, but it's not only the case that it sounds Dutch. I grew up in the Netherlands, so working with my second home country is a real pleasure and honor for me. We are here today to discuss challenges, opportunities of the sustainable bioeconomy and to learn from country experiences. And we are very honored to listen to a first country experience from Denmark, firsthand from the Minister for the Green Transformation in Denmark. And Minister Bruus, thank you for joining us here. The floor is yours. We look forward to listening to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great honor to be able to speak to you. Some of you may have heard me a bit earlier today. I'll just warn you, you'll get the fantastic story once more. For the rest of you, it'll be a first-time experience. The Netherlands and the OECD is actually of great inspiration to me. Before I was appointed Minister of Green Transition, I was also having an odd ministry, the Ministry of Taxation. Only 5 ministers of taxation around the world, one of them actually from the Netherlands. And so I was studying the nitrogen question, how do you do with handling that with the agricultural sector. Trying to figure out how do we do a carbon pricing tax on lowering emissions from the agricultural sector. The Netherlands was of inspiration, so were New Zealand, and I'll come back to that. I also worked with the OECD, working out how to collect knowledge about carbon pricing globally, how to make it into concrete use for states, to expand the work tools towards driving climate change. Why is this relevant into a future of bioeconomics? Because it's very closely connected, obviously. We have scarce resources. Denmark being a small country, 60% of land is farmland. And so we have to figure out a way how to solve many problems at once using our land's multifunctional, which is also the same as transforming our way of producing into a new bioeconomic way of thinking, combining what we're good at in the agricultural sector with our biotech, Novo Nordisk, all these big companies in Denmark. And that's the whole idea. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Danish case. We did an agreement on a Green Deal in Denmark. During spring last year, we sat down together with the farmers' unions, with the biggest nature organization in Denmark, local municipalities, led by 5 ministers in the government, trying to figure out how do we solve all these problems, how do we create a situation where we can actually move forward. And can we deal with creating the first CO2 tax on emissions from the agricultural sector. And so we were successful not only in doing that, but also solving other problems. And so we made a great Green Deal in what we call the Green Tripartite in the spring, ended up with a deal in the summer, and then we created this new ministry saying, okay, we have this great deal, now we'll do something new, we'll create a new ministry to actually implement the deal. Since we have had a lot of fine political agreements and too little action. And so my ministry is an action ministry, implementing ministry. And so I was appointed. I was glad for the job. I had been glad as a Minister of Taxation, but I've also very involved in making this Green Deal. And so through fall, we were negotiating in the Parliament and landed a broad political agreement in November. And so what's it about? It's about Denmark having some of the world's most ambitious climate goals. we need to reduce by 70% by 2030, obviously compared to 1990. And so we have done, when I was Minister of Taxation, we did a carbon pricing tax on Danish industries on top of the European quota system. We have done taxes on heavy trucks, aviation tax, etc. So sector by sector, we are reducing emissions by 2030. And today, emissions from the agricultural sector is 1/3 of all emissions from Denmark. By 2030, it will be half of all emissions, because the emissions from the industry is going down, the emissions from the transportation sector is going down. And so if we don't figure out a way also to lower emissions from our agricultural sector, we won't reach our climate goals. Also, we need obviously good ecological status of all water services, the EU Water Frame Directive. We won't reach the deadline by 27. No other European countries won't either, but we are firmly committed to do so in a fast matter way. And we also need to recognize that we're not only facing a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis. And so it's all, therefore, in this great Green Deal, trying to handle climate solutions for the agricultural sector, getting better water environment, and also creating more space for nature. That's why one of the plans is to plant a lot of new forest. First of all, the climate tax on house gas emissions from livestock, the first in the world, is obviously an incentive to invest in producing without lower emissions. So you have to, pay less tax, and thereby also give an incentive to invest in bioeconomy, to make sure to figure out how do we be even more effective in our and raising productivity in the farming industry and food industry. And so it'll be in effect by 2030 and fully implemented by 2040. We know it will work because the incentives change behavior. When I was appointed Minister of Taxation in February 22, my first task was to do a carbon price on Danish industries. And so it was effective by 1st of January this year. What's the status here 2.5 years later? The 44 biggest polluting industries in Denmark, plants, have lowered their emissions by nearly 20%. Some of it they have done anyway, but most of it is due to they know that there's a tax starting being implemented by 2025, and so it drives investments into this. And at the same time, we're investing heavily in carbon capture and storage. So that was a part of the deal that we did with industries back in the summer of 22. And it's also part of the deal we have done here with the agricultural sector, saying, okay, you have to invest, you have to change your behavior, but as a society, we will also invest in new technologies, driving a new bioeconomy forward. And so that's one key element. Another key element is that we have, I should say, Brazilian coastline there. Denmark, being a small country surrounded by water, have a coastline as long as the Brazilian coastline. I don't know if you know how long the Brazilian coastline is, but it's long. Then we have to figure out how do we lower or reduce nitrogen emissions by nearly 14,000 tons. What does that mean? Today it's around 60,000 tons. So we have to lower it fast. Also to be able to deliver on the water directive. And so we'll have to take out the lands that are polluting our fjords and seas with too much nitrogen. We have to take out the peat lands that are polluting our atmosphere. And so this is part of it. And the third key element is that we are going to change 10% of the Danish landscape. And it means that 15% of our current farm lands will be out of production from farming and going into nature and forest. We're going to plant 1 billion trees over the next 20 years. which is equivalent to the 250,000 hectares. We are going to take out 140,000 hectares of carbon-enriched drained peatlands, and thereby also creating more and bigger areas of forest and nature, also to deliver on also the European goals of even more spaces for biodiversity and creating new national nature parks. So, how the heck did we get the farmers to join this deal? Taking out all this land, because we also invest. We invest in new methods of producing. The deal is also, when you're taking out a land of production because it's, polluting our fjords and seas, the land up here that's not a peatland or not, leading out too much nitrogen, you should be able to produce even more effective on that land. So it's a balance in the deal. And it's also driving new methods of farming that are more eco-friendly. And therefore, bioeconomy, and just a few points here, is extremely important. When we put on top all the ambitions we have in Denmark on doubling our ecological production, on planting forest, on taking out lands, etc., we need 130% of our current land. And since we figure out that it'd be a bit more difficult to win it back from Sweden and Germany, we had to figure another way, figure out how do we do then, fulfill all our ambitions. So we have to do more smart on the same land. So you can imagine in the future we have forests with windmills on top. We're taking out peatlands, whether it be solar cells. We are creating new areas of water protection where we will have grass and ecological production. And so when we do that, this is a big exercise in trying to deal with the cascading use and biorefinery. And make sure, for example, with grass is, it's an old-time tool. In all times we have been using grass. Now we're going to use it again in a smart way, where we take out protein, where we take out fibers for clothing, where we use it in our biorefineries, where you can have cows grassing it maybe in some areas, etc., etc. So just one example to support it and also to invest in research in new technologies. So that's how we are reshaping our economy and our production in the agricultural sector from a more traditional-based production into bioeconomy. Just a few points and then I will stop. We obviously have to also invest, so we are creating a green fund where we see it as a one-time investment. If you look at it in a historic view, now we're going to invest heavily in taking out land. Also, 1/3 of all farmers are going on pension over the next 10 years in Denmark. So if we're buying out farmers that are going on pension and being able to swap lands with the farmers that are, maybe having a land that are polluting, but being able to buy something up here that are not, that's part of the deal. So we are creating this big fund and also trying to attract more capital. Novo Nordisk Foundation have supported by 1.3 billion euros. We created 23 local tripartite groups all over the country, where the local municipalities, the agricultural sector, the nature organizations are sitting together and doing concrete planning. So last year we negotiated all year. This year we're going to act. We're going to plan and we're going to act, and we're going to take out the lands that that needs to be taken out. But we're also going to invest heavily in new technologies and drive bioeconomy, new tools, putting them out, being available to farmers, creating businesses, creating link between businesses in Denmark. And that's also why, and that's my last slide here, that we said, okay, now we have this great deal. Let's try to figure out a way where it's not, ending up the same places, and many other great deals that it's then spread out on different ministries, trying to say, we have this problem, maybe we should put it into these boxes that we already know. So we created a new box, a new ministry that are having one job. That's my one job is to make sure that this deal is implemented. And thereby also being able to solve some of the problems and some of the bureaucracy and being a one-stop shop. So it's also obviously my responsibility to coordinate with my colleagues, but also to drive this change. And that's what we're going to do. And the great thing is that the farmers' unions and the farmers that I visit, a lot of them these days, are on board mostly. Obviously, some will be critical, I recognize that, and also nervous about the future. But a lot of farmers and a lot of young farmers are seeing this as a huge business opportunity where we create jobs, where we're not exporting production, and we are doing it in a social balance way, all the balances that are part of the Danish Climate Act, that we are not intent to shut down production, we are going to create even more jobs. Is it possible when you're still taxing more? It is. We see when we introduce the tax, the carbon pricing tax on Danish industries, they are not asking, what should we do with all the employers that we need to, fire? They are asking, where are all the employers we need to drive this change? And so that's the whole benefit of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this speech. We have in the title Promises and Challenges, but I think your speech should have called Making It a Reality. There's definitely a very clear plan there and a credible plan. We look forward to see this evolving. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. I now forgot my papers. Thank you, Minister. If you with the names I have to announce, sorry for this. We will now move into the panel session. There will be 3 speakers with 3 country examples, and I would like to call you now to the stage. Please, Peter Oey from the Netherlands, join us. You can choose one of the 3 seats. I will call all of them to the floor. Then from Brazil with the long coastline, we have already heard that. Daniel Ladetti, please join us. And from New Zealand, please tell us, Oliver Hendrickson, how long your coastline is, but surrounded by water, New Zealand, Oliver Hendrickson. Thank you for joining us. And I will stay here then. And I start by giving you the floor, Peter. You have PowerPoint slide and are going to continue the discussion on the Netherlands and tell us a bit more about the Dutch experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share some experience we have with our national plan for bio-based building. So we actually focus on one specific application of biomass. And actually, it's work for 4 ministries, as I will show. And why is it actually so important? If you look at the current building industry, it emits about 40% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So if you only look at the red line in the graph, that's the emission line if you build with concrete, with glass, with steel, with very high emission in the beginning. And if you look at the green line, it shows what happens if you work with wood, with flax, with hemp. So then you actually store the carbon. And if you put it in a building, you can store it for a long time. And that allows the opportunity to use so-called carbon credits. So where did it all start? We had a very small lab a few years ago where we started with horticultural waste. And if you look at the right-hand building, you wouldn't probably notice that it actually contains like 80% of the volume is made out of bell pepper stems. So it was the first building which had bell pepper stems. And the building on the left, it was also on the Floriade. it was commissioned by the ministry, by the central government, and we asked like 16 different producers of startups to produce all different kinds of wall systems made out of bio-based materials. And this was one. I had a very young group of some of the people are here, and we made super weird stuff, which is not all on the market, but we had a lot of fun. And more important, about 16 LCAs, so life cycle analysis, were also added. Because to make it more easy for those startups to come onto the market, because there's a lot of, it's not so easy, there's a lot of market entry barriers if you want to have a new product. And what we did after that, we had a sort of buyer group. And the buyer group is very essential because you can actually stimulate the market, you create a market pool, and we helped companies and organizations which had a building project to use as much bio-based material as possible. And one very interesting, of course, was our own ministry had to be rebuilt. So, but actually it took a lot of work to convince the people from the central government real estate agency to really convert them in a way. And there were really interesting results, but the most important was not just this simple one example of our own ministry. The most important was that they took it up, and it's now in their general policy. So for each and every building, the central government real estate agency, that's English for me, it's a bit different, they have a specific amount of bio-based material for every different application. So if it's like insulation, it's 80%. If it's for doors, it's like 90%. So you can actually create a market pool because you just demand it. And this is for every single building. There's about 4,000 people working there. And it's not easy to implement this kind of things within sometimes bureaucratic systems, but it worked. And actually we were helped a lot with some experts from the field, and they started what was called the Building Balance as a Foundation. And I have to admit, they were really crucial. So actually they helped sometimes to get the ministries together, to be honest. And we proposed together with the building sector, we proposed a plan for 200 million from the climate fund, because agriculture doesn't have that much money. And we thought that it's really important to have like 3 transitions. It's not just about having enough bio-based material, it's also about making sure that you can convert these materials into a building material, because we don't have such a large industry in that effect. And also very important, of course, is that the building sector adopts it. And it may seem a lot of money, 200 million for this, but actually if you look at the building sector, the turnover is about 20 billion a year. So if we have like 200 million in 7 years, it's maybe not that much. And we set stringent targets. So 30% of the new houses to be built in 2030 should contain 30% bio-based material at the least. The existing buildings, if you renovate them, they should contain at least 30% bio-based material. And also there's another sector, the infrastructure sector, where we can use the lignin. Lignin is, for example, present in things like elephant grass. You can use a biorefinery to get the lignin and the cellulose. Sorry, I'm getting a bit technical, but you use the cellulose for the paper industry, and the lignin can be used in the asphalt of the road construction. But when it comes down to the agriculture sector, it means that we have to have 400,000 tons of dry matter available in 2030 for the building sector. And we expect it to use about 50,000 hectares for this purpose. And there is some discussion, of course, is it going against food? But of course, if you use straw, which is already like a crop, it's more like multi-using. It's like a total use. Yeah, you have the grain and you have the straw. For other crops like hemp, you need them in the crop rotation. And there's still others like the perennials, like elephant grass. And these are very good for places where it's more difficult to have a good agricultural practice because of drought. So if you have drought sensitive places, it would be great to have like elephant grass at those places. So as I said, 4 ministries, and we actually have interlocking goals. And most important is to create the right market conditions. And then we have a whole range of interventions. There's like 39 of them. So one is like a subsidy for private homeowners to use the bio-based building material. And most of it is like scaling up. It's not about innovation. It's more about, it's like 10% is for innovation and knowledge, but 90% is really about scaling up. That's it. So how do we do it? We have like 20 different regional chains, but there's also like more chains where you actually have a much bigger production, and it goes to all over the country. But the funny thing about some of these products is that you can actually use them very locally. So for example, if you grow grain or if you have elephant grass and you work together with local housing corporations, you can have a super short chain, which means that the income is also coming to the farmers and not to all kinds of in-between intermediaries. So one example here is about straw and how you use it. You can make prefab elements. You can do it for either new houses, renovation of houses, private homes. So you have to find a sort of market fit between the product and the crops you have and the actual application. And we have about 60 different product market combinations. Sounds maybe a lot, but building industry is quite complex. So I think most important for this to share, at least also for the international public, is the new policy instrument we developed. And I can assure you it takes time within the ministry because it's new and there's all kinds of legal aspects. But we did manage in the end to have a new policy instrument, which is the Dutch constructed stored carbon credit. And I think we have to be clear on if you want to have climate action, storage of carbon is essential. We can't do without storage of carbon. One of the ways is in form of building materials with a long life within the buildings. And for that, to have really trustworthy certificates, you need a standardized method. So we have one central method, but then actually our legal people said, but you have to also accept others as long as they follow the main guidelines. And by doing so, we actually make sure that the material really goes from the farmer to the builders. Because if you just grow elephant grass and you put it in the stable, the carbon dioxide will be released within 2 years. So that's not what we want. So what we found also that what the farmers need is liquidity at the start. If you want to grow elephant grass, they have to spend about €5,000 a hectare. And then first year, they don't get any income. And we also wanted to get extra income for the farmers. And it still sounds a lot like the 200 million. About 50 million was allocated for the carbon credits. But it's still not that much if you compare to the 50,000 hectares. So what we actually want to get started is a market for these voluntary carbon credits. And we will actually resell the carbon credits we buy. So it will really become a revolving fund. And because it's within these construction stored carbon credits with the certification, we are sure that the biomass will really go into the buildings. For the coming years, we have about 22 million. We just started the first round in December. And what do we actually pay then? It's about, so the farmers can offer, whether they want to offer it at 75 or 90, they get like 500 euro per hectare for hemp, about 4,000 for elephant grass. And we had one application stands sometimes for 10 or 20 farmers. What we actually find now is that the supply chain is actually the limiting factor. So we really have to speed up the demand for the material. But it does help a lot, and it also creates a lot of clarity in the supply chains. Okay, that was my last slide, and there's a lot more to tell because it's super complicated, these carbon credits. But you can contact me on this email address, or you can go to the website of Building Balance, which is in Dutch, but you can use it. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Please join us on the panel. Thank you for this presentation. We go from the Netherlands and Denmark to Brazil. Daniel, you are Deputy General Coordinator for Sustainable Development in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. Brazil is a very different country from the Netherlands or from Denmark, different size, different climatic conditions, but this theme of the bioeconomy is also a theme close to the heart of Brazil. Please tell us about your country experience.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for hosting this event. And Minister, fortunately, I was born in the coast of Brazil, so I know by heart that it's as long as almost 80,000 kilometers, so it's huge, as is your coast, of course, coastline. So, as you know, Brazil has created the G20 initiative on bioeconomy because we think that bioeconomy is one of the main instruments to tackle climate change, to tackle the challenge of sustainable development as a whole, including economic, social, and environmental challenges. And we were successful because we had reached the agreement on the high-level principles on bioeconomy, which are the first diplomatic document on bioeconomy exclusively, because before that we saw that bioeconomy was part of some discussions here or there, but there was no exclusively forum to debate that. But now we want more, because of course G20 represents 80% of global GDP and population, but we have more people, more countries, and we want that it becomes multilateral. So we will host COP30 next year, this year, we are already in 25, in Belém, in the very heart of the Brazilian Amazon, and you are of course all invited to come to Brazil to meet the Brazilian Amazon, the challenge we have there, and also the huge potential that we have in bioeconomy in Brazil, because we understand that bioeconomy is of course sustainable use of biodiversity, but also biomedicine, bioenergy, bioindustry, biomanufacturing, biorefineries. We saw that in the meetings of G20, and we see this here in these different very good panels, that every country and everybody can gain something from bioeconomy, and also it can be part of our humanity task as tackling climate change and sustainable development challenge. So we try to innovate because we had some provocations at the meetings. We brought traditional knowledge as one of the important parts of bioeconomy, along with modern science. Sometimes we developed very modern science, cutting-edge science, as we had in Brazil, in the countryside of Brazil, in São Paulo. Actually, we have huge and big institutions of science, modern science, but we also have an important part of bioeconomy, traditional knowledge, and we can take advantage of this and make traditional communities, local communities part of this development and of this task. So looking ahead, we see that these three main axes of bioeconomy, which are first, sustainable use of biodiversity, and biotechnology in general, along with not only modern science, but along with traditional knowledge. And then in a more broad way, bioeconomy for sustainable development. We see these three main axes as much important as all the work we are doing. We are preparing for COP30. And we understand that in COP30, as this is part of UNFCCC, we can have all the countries together to talk about bioeconomy. So that's the general idea and strategy behind the creation of the initiative at G20, and now the task of trying to multilateralize the debates and having these high-level principles as a first document to work on, and then having more perspectives and having, of course, all the continents and all the world together to use this momentum. We see a huge momentum for bioeconomy, and of course Brazil is glad to host the COP and to be here, to have hosted G20, and you can count on us on these efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. And so we have talking and today here in Berlin, but bioeconomy plays, of course, a central theme, and we already know where we continue the discussion in Belém. So looking forward to that. Oliver, you are based in Europe, in Brussels, but you come from far away, from New Zealand. Again, a different climatic zone. How do you look at this theme, bioeconomy, in your country?
Great. Can you hear me? Yep. And thank you, Marian. And thank you for the organizers for this wonderful event. New Zealand's extremely pleased to be able to share our experience and to participate. A brief background on New Zealand. We're a country of 5 million. We're about the size of Italy, a north-south spread across 2 islands. And agriculture, our food and fiber sector, which includes forestry and fisheries, is the backbone of our economy. It provides 11% of our GDP, and 13% of our workforce is employed in agriculture. We're a country of 5 million. We also feed about 45 million. Our export profile is that we export about 85% of what we produce. So we're very dependent on the international trading world system and the free trading agreements that we get in place. But New Zealand also has taken a very different route than many other countries. And in the 80s, we reached a point where we had a bit of an economic crisis. We had subsidies for wool and sheep meat, and we had market barriers and trade incentives there. And we had to strip all those subsidies out and the tax incentives away, because ultimately we are starting to subsidize land use change that was completely unsustainable. We had deforestation occurring in about 2 million hectares, and it was completely unproductive land. The government was effectively having to pay for the slaughter of lambs. There was no market price for these. So when we took away those economic subsidies, what happened? Well, we found farmers actually started to work towards the world market price, and they diversified in their land use. And where before, a lot of people think of New Zealand, they think of sheep. Well, we still have a lot of sheep, but we've cut our herd in half. And what we have done is diversified across the primary industries. We have a really strong horticultural sector, and you'll see many of New Zealand's horticultural products in Europe. A big dairy industry, sheep and dairy, and fishing and forestry. We export into 140 different markets now. And when we pulled those subsidies out, the government didn't abandon its agricultural sector at all. It pushed hard on free trade agreements, and it pushed hard about co-investment on innovation and finding solutions for farmers around having to be more productive and to work within their means. Where did we land? We quadrupled our production, and our emission intensity continues to drop. And we did this without economic subsidies. And I do appreciate probably many in the audience, there is a lot of economic subsidies, and I'll touch on that later around some of the important bits that I think we need to work on there. But I want to provide some of the examples we have around bioeconomy in New Zealand, because we look at it very much through a trade lens, and we think not just about the nice product that's on the shelf. We think about everything that gets that product to the shelf and to the consumer. We're thinking about packaging, we're thinking about transportation, and we're thinking about how we can use our waste streams that typically would have gone just into the landfill, food waste, waste energy, woody biomass that is lost, and thinking about how do we convert those into energy streams? And how do we also think about packaging that can help improve that? So one example is we have a biopolymer network, which looks at actually using compostable alternatives to polystyrene packaging. And if you know polystyrene, it's a petrochemical product. But through our biopolymer network, we've created a new product called Xyloform. It's 100% plant-based. There are no petrochemicals used. And in one example that I can give, we use it to be able to do consignments of fresh fish that needs to be kept chilled. So here we are, is that we are enabling out plastic packaging. But also important, if you think about what creates to do the packaging, the Xyloform works within the equipment that's necessary to do the packaging from the pre-existing petrochemical stuff. So it's quite smart. We also have a lot of work around thinking around biochar, which we see as a critical way to enhance our soil carbon and to get more soil fertility to happen as well. And we do struggle, even though a typical New Zealand farm has about 100 tons of carbon per hectare in the soil, we are struggling still to maintain our productivity. So we're looking at more areas that we can use biochar. And we happen to have a really big forestry industry. The forest waste and residues, though, are largely lost and actually become environmental impacts. We have flash flooding, and we have the release of slash, wood debris, that floods into our waterways and creates impact to communities and impact to infrastructure. So we need to think about how we get that biomass off. And in some areas where we can actually turn that into an energy source where we actually look to provide sources for fuel for some of our shipping as well. Another area, and I really loved your talk before, where I saw a lot about construction. we have a mid-rise timber construction program where we're looking at how we can use engineered timber to build mid-rise construction buildings. And you saw some beautiful pictures, and every wooden building I see just looks stunning. And I go, I want to live there, I want to work there. But again, it's like that product. How do we get the product there? So in the New Zealand example there, with our mid-rise construction program, we're also looking at the whole building codes, the standards, and the fire, making sure that it's fireproof, et cetera, and then doing a huge amount of open communication, talking to architects, talking to the banks, and trying to get that initiative to happen there. Because even though New Zealand has a lot of trees and an earthquake-prone building, we still build a lot in concrete and steel, and we know that those are high-emission construction methods. So we're trying to shift that dial there. But we need to work internationally with our partners as well. And maybe I'll just pause for there to keep the panel going for now.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you, Oliver, for your intervention. We're going to enter a bit of into a conversational mode here, if that's okay with you. And then I'm going to also will open up the floor for questions. So please start to get ready for your questions in the audience. One question I would have is about the market. We heard, Oliver, from you, it's important for you that things remain tradable. So we talk about international market. We heard from Peter that you have to create demand, so you have to create the market. So how and having that market system functioning will be important for scaling up the type of initiatives we are talking about. So Daniel, maybe back to you. In your G20 discussions or in your current work, how is that issue of making sure the markets work for the bioeconomy, how is that being discussed and being tackled?
Thank you. Okay. Very good question, and actually absolutely important one. We have discussed these high-level principles, and of course we have mentioned the economic conditions and the market conditions, and also developed some ideas how to create these market ecosystems to develop the different sectors of bioeconomy. Right now, South Africa, which holds the current presidency of G20, is working on creating metrics and indicators just to model how to measure bioeconomy, and then we can also use this as a tool to develop the market for that. Because, of course, we already have some markets on the bioeconomy, but we are not wanting just a repack of the economy, but also rethinking it. So we would create new things and new models of doing the bioeconomy. That's the idea behind it. Because, as I said, we have many challenges nowadays in our planet, so we need to think different on how to tackle them to really advance. So I think the first step is to create these metrics and indicators, and then also to assess how to make market conditions better for the bioeconomy development.
Thank you, Oliver. You think as relatively small country far away, trade is important for New Zealand. How international does that discussion on the market have to be?
It's critical about trying to get the international trade market to think about how do we create a global pathway for low carbon agricultural products and food. And it's at times easy to think about the like I've used before, the thing on the shelf, but everything that gets it there is really important. So, for example, where we also need to do work is we've got a lot of research around thinking about how some of the technologies around feed or genetics that could help reduce the emissions from animals. And in New Zealand's example, because of our energy profile, which is largely renewable, 53% of our emissions comes from agriculture, particularly from animals. So we're already kind of ahead of the curve from many other countries dealing with agricultural emissions now. But while we know these technologies are coming and we're getting ready to think about them, we need to think about the food that gets produced, and we need to think about the food safety aspects and the nutritional aspects. The consumer wants food that is sustainable. They want to know that it's exactly as healthy as the stuff that was on the shelves last year, and it's got a good shelf life, it's attractive. We need to be thinking about the whole value chain aspect and working around standards and data. And at the international level, I think it's really critical that we get some of the common metrics and the data right. But equally, we need to be talking to farmers so that farmers understand how they can actually control their destiny. Because while it's great to set targets and governments set lots of targets, targets without tools are not helpful. So one of the examples, if I can use there, is that we have a joint private partnership in New Zealand called AgriDense. Over the next 4 years, we're going to spend about 230 million euros. We've got the major banks in New Zealand involved, our big Crown Research Institutes, which are also linked with European institutes as well for agricultural research, and we have farmers there. And we're looking to see how we can get calculators, and we just actually released in December a calculator for on-farm emissions. Now, this is for animals, and importantly, it allows farmers to think about, how do I control the out numbers? If I input this new inhibitor or this new genetics, I can push my carbon numbers down. So when New Zealand introduces pricing by 2030, farmers have tools, and we're thinking about that. But we need to create this global pathway for these technologies to come on, and we need more investment to come on.
Thank you for this, and I think that we also heard from the Danish experience the importance of helping the private sector to be ready once the regulations or the new policies hit, in order for the transition to be positive for all players involved. Peter, if I may go back to you, your market sounded quite domestic still, and public procurement seemed to play an important role. How do you envisage this move to a bigger market, private sector involvement? And given that I'm talking to the Netherlands, I would expect you are thinking of exporting too, but I'm looking forward to hear from you.
Well, actually we are importing a lot of wood. So one of the things that might be interesting is to see whether we can harvest much more wood from our forest. So we've been talking to our state forestry agents, and actually they harvest only like 1/3 of what's actually possible to harvest, with keeping the biodiversity intact. So one of the things so we are actually a net importer of a lot of wood. So we're not really thinking about exporting, because we still don't have enough for our own consumption. I think it's also important to stress that what we do with the bio-based crops, it also helps in the water quality. It also helps in giving a perspective to the farmers. So for example, if you have like 100 cows, which is quite typical, and you go down to 75 cows and you have like 5 hectares of elephant grass, you can still have a profitable business. And then you cut emissions. You also produce something which is in demand by the building sector. So we have to find we have to give a solution to different problems at the same time. It's not just about money. It's also about lowering the impact on the environment by the farmers.
Thank you, Peter. If there are questions in the room, this is for me the moment to start taking them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I wrap and I get them together. I get some answers, and then back to the floor over there.
Thank you. My name is Jan Dreyer from the human rights organization FIAN, and I have 2 questions. The first question is related to land. So I'm preaching to the choir, Mr. Lodetti, my question is to you. Preaching to the choir if I say there's a massive land concentration in Brazil. Yet, within the framework of bioeconomy, you are pushing again for the production of agricultural products for fuel. And in the framework of Mercosur, that's only going to profit the big farmers. So my question really is, what safeguards do you put in place to prevent further land grabbing? And my second question is about the indigenous knowledge. You talked about the importance of the indigenous knowledge, and you said participation is important in that regard to you. But what exact mechanisms do you have for participation of indigenous peoples, peasants, landless peoples, and also, how do they work, and what is the political weight of the voices in these mechanisms for the people?
Thank you. There was somebody sitting behind you who raised a hand. Please.
Hi. A few hours ago, I had a discussion with the market, with people from the organic sector, and they talked about the incentive of being more efficient on CO2. And then we talked about optimizing the CO2 KPI in comparison with, for example, biodiversity or animal welfare. How do we make sure that if we start optimizing those different KPIs, that we go in the right direction and not have negative trade-offs when it comes to the other KPIs, especially from the market concepts?
Thank you for that question. And I take two more questions and I go back to the panel. Question here in front and then over there. In front, please.
Thank you. Mark Titterington, Director of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Peter, fascinating presentation on the carbon credits. I'm involved in an ag-based voluntary carbon market in the US as well. How did you get that price point of 75 to 90 euros per credit, which I have to say I think is the defining factor of whether a farmer is interested or not? And then I think you said you resell the credits as well on the voluntary market. What kind of demand are you facing? And if you're having an uplift, are you returning any of that money to the farmers?
Thank you. Very different, very interesting questions. And the last one.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Clark Halpern. I'm a PhD candidate at Wageningen University. And I think we've seen some really wonderful examples how you're encouraging the biomass markets in your respective countries. But from the Danish example, we saw that it needs to come with also some sort of carrot and a stick. And I was wondering what sort of disincentives you were having to the petrochemical industry in order to allow for the expansion of the bioeconomy. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of interesting questions. I'm going to abuse of my situation as a chair to answer, to give some insights on what the OECD does on this KPI and weighing issue. We have a very active agenda at the OECD on measuring the sustainability performance of agriculture. And with large groups of experts from across our membership and beyond, notably including Brazil, we are discussing how to work towards all these KPIs together and how to measure this. How do we combine different types of KPIs, and how do we bring productivity also into the discussion? Because ultimately, and Oliver also said this quite well, we have to continue to feed a growing world population. So yes, environmentally sustainable, but also productivity has to be there. And ultimately, it is ends up in a discussion on, yes, metrics, but also in weighing what is the variable that is most important, that may differ also per country, depending on what your situation at home is. Daniel, a number of questions were directed to you, coming from a very biodiverse country. And those of you who have not been in Brazil, I invite all of you to go, and I cannot, I don't live there, but please go and visit those forests and discover what biodiversity is, because those of us who have spent their lives in Europe cannot, sometimes not even imagine what it looks like. Over to you.
Thank you, Marianne, and I think you got the exactly point. Thank you, Andrea, for the two questions. I think that's a very important point, because sometimes we have this cognitive bias of trying to see another context with the same parameters of our context. And I think that may be some problematic, because, for example, in Brazil, of course, we have this production of food that's huge, but we also have a production of bioenergy, which is sustainable, and we are facing a climate huge challenge. It's a way to decarbonize the economy, and we are already doing that. We have two decades in Brazil that we have flex fuel vehicles that can use alcohol entirely. For example, my vehicle, I just use alcohol. I don't use petrol. Of course, we also are a big producer of petrol, but we are trying to do this transition. So we have options, because the electric mix in Brazil is more than 90% renewable. So we can have the option of electric cars, but we also have the option of bioenergy. And there are always some scientific debate on that, because if you go to Brazil and if you see what we do, as I mentioned before, in the countryside of São Paulo, which is a huge producer of sugarcane, for example, you see that we have these cutting-edge technologies that not only compete food with fuel, because we are using the rotation of crops not only to have bioenergy when we could not have anything there, but also to improve the productivity of food, because we use the residues to make bioenergy, and we have discovered some years ago this technology that make this bioenergy also having an output of new food. So we have a cutting-edge technology on that, and of course we also have this different condition, because in Brazil we have a much more elastic supply of land. That's not the case, for example, in some countries that are different, not as huge as in Brazil. So I think we may take care on just transporting some parameters from one country to another, because we have different contexts, and it's why we are trying to do at COP30 in the Amazon, bring it together, everybody, every different context, to see that we have different things, different technologies, different parameters, and we can have different options to tackle climate change also. Thank you.
Thank you, and also the opportunity to learn from each other, as unfortunately many of our countries are experiencing climate change, so we are seeing also changes in what can be produced where. Some climates are becoming more tropical, can learn from you. Others are becoming more arid, can learn from countries in other regions. So I think this global exchange that is taking place here and will take place at the COP is very important. Oliver, there were questions directed to you.
Sorry, on the KPIs on organics? Great. When I think of organics, I think it as one farming system. It's not for everyone, and it has lots of good pros and cons, and I don't pass any judgment on it. I also look at the work that's happening in new genomic techniques, and I think that's also equally interesting, and how we make a world work with both. That'll be very interesting. You mentioned, though, about how we get KPIs, and often one thing I see in a lot of regulatory systems is they get ahead of themselves with multiple demands and objectives to come through. And in the New Zealand example, where I have seen that we've had really a comprehensive program come through around biodiversity protection, freshwater improvement, and action on climate change, animal welfare. And those are just the things that I can talk to in my purview. However, there's also been tax, employment law, etc. And these are all demands that come down. If you funnel it all down, where does it come down to? It comes down to a family farm. And so when I see a lot of struggles with some of the regulatory system, it's often because the regulators and the policymakers have not actually thought about how do these policies boil down to be complementary. And so what happens ultimately is that you have farmers that are on the farm there. They probably have a mortgage. They have constraints like any of us in our lives. They don't have endless piles of capital to play around with. And they're thinking, I'm being told that I need to make an improvement on my farm. Which improvement would you like me to make? And which one is actually going to tick that without exasperating that? I don't want to get in trouble with the tax person or this. What is some of the innovations that I can bring on farm that can try to achieve? And I think that's the real goal for a lot of policymakers, is to work in cross-agency teams. I've been in the public sector for close to 15, 20 years, and everyone talks about silos, and we're going to break the silos down. Well, the silos keep coming back, and that's something that we really need to see happen in policy, is actually starting to think about who is the customer, and that's a kind of a jarring thing to think. It's actually the farmer often, and how do we put ourselves in their shoes to think about how the policy comes through that can be complementary, that they support each other, and they're clear, because ultimately it's a family sitting around the dinner table, and that family is running the HR, right, for the farm. They're getting the kids to school, and we need to start thinking in that sort of mind frame when we want to think about how we encourage innovation or change on farm. And to be careful too, that change is a challenging subject for many. Farmers have got a long tradition of how to farm, and we shouldn't tell them necessarily how to farm because they've been doing it for a very long time. When we start talking about change and asking them to do things differently, they've probably got 200 years of institutional expertise that tells them maybe they shouldn't. So that's a big case to push against as to why change should happen. And they've seen a lot of public servants come and go before. They survive. So that's my 2 cents on that, sorry.
Thank you, Oliver. And I may want to come back to this silos later on, but I would like us to pause also when you refer back to the farmers' knowledge for decades or hundreds of years. And it has occurred to me in the discussions at the OECD where we have a discussion in general on traditional farming, for instance, in Europe, New Zealand, but also the discussions on indigenous populations and farming. And there is something in common about long-standing tacit experience and knowledge that is being transmitted. And that is something that we have to learn how to take into account. And that knowledge is very much linked to working with nature and therefore very close to the bioeconomy thinking. Whilst the audience is getting ready for the next round of questions, Peter, you can come in.
Yeah, so there were some very clear questions about the market demand. Well, the EU has going to set new standards for the voluntary carbon credit renewal. And so what's actually happening? So one part is on the side of the creation of the carbon credits. So you should be able to trust it, that it's really, the carbon should be really in the building. So I think we've managed that quite clearly. And then, of course, the price needs to be high enough for the farmers to actually take the step. And so that's what we weighed. We did the market research as well. And the market research was on 2 sides. One is on the farmer sides, and we also connected to the branch organizations in the Netherlands. And the other side is the buyer's market. And what we see at the buyer's market, it depends a lot on what you can actually claim with this carbon credit. And there's, unfortunately, still a lot unclear. So that's why we started a project to actually make it more easy to sell. But then we also discovered that our same government is already buying voluntary carbon credits from another side. So we thought, okay, we should really align with our own government, of course, because they were buying them from to actually compensate for travel. And then, so what I envision is that we make it much more clear what you can actually do with these carbon credits from the side of the buyer. So at this point, you're only allowed to say, I contributed this much amount of carbon storage, but you're not allowed to say, I'm compensating, because this would allow for greenwashing, and this is something we have to be really careful about. And so there's still discussion to be followed. Well, the market research we did showed that a price of somewhere between 70 and 140 euros would seem probable. Because we pay upfront, we find it also quite reasonable that we don't pay the full amount of 140, we pay 75 or 90 euros upfront, and sometimes we even get them only after 3 years. So in that sense, I think we do a fair offer to the farmers, and they can decide whether they get an extra turnover. We actually pay them to have to contribute to taking the carbon out and organizing the chain to the builders.
Thank you, Peter. Are there more questions? I think we have time for 3. 1. Good, that's easy. 2. Last one, if not 2 questions, 3. 1, 2, 3, and we stay in one corner. That's easy for logistics. Please.
Thank you. As a farmer from the Netherlands, I'm of course interested in what the Dutch government does, but shouldn't we look at the bioeconomy more from a European perspective or even from a global perspective? Because as an economist, I think we should do production where it fits best, and not only where it fits best from a climate point of view, but also from an economic point of view, so where it's most efficient. Our land prices are very high in the Netherlands, so, well, as a consequence, you have to pay a lot to a Dutch farmer to make him change, whereas, for example, to an Hungarian farmer, you have to pay much less to make the same changes and even have probably better effects. So are the governments in Europe working together, cooperating to get the most impact? And the most impact is probably not doing it on the national scale, but doing it on European scale or on the global scale. So we'd have to like a reaction to that, please.
Thank you for that question. And it occurs to me we have 3 exporting countries here, right? 3 agricultural exporters. You have that in common. Second question. Oh, in front, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Clara Martinez from ECBF, a venture capital fund focused on circular bioeconomy. My question is very simple. It's like, what are you doing concretely to involve the private sector, the private market, or the private investors to support these targets, this journey? Like, how can we de-risk the investments so the venture capital funds and other type of funds and financial instruments can be more bold to put money on it?
Yeah, thank you. The financial aspect of things, very important. Thanks for that question. And the last question.
Hi, my name is Julia. I am a PhD student in Nuremberg, FAO. And my question goes back a little bit to the first question over there about integration, traditional knowledge, and considering traditional populations in the dialogue. And it goes both to Mr. Lodetti and Hendrickson, how this is considered in the policies in the country, in Brazil and New Zealand. And that's it. Thank you.
Yep, so I think Daniel is ready to jump in on that last question. He forgot to answer it before. Daniel, over to you, and please, any of the other questions.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for the question, of course. And I'm sorry, Andre, I forgot to answer that one. So in Brazil, I think I can mention 3 main points on traditional knowledge valuation and making it part of our economy. First point, Brazil is creating hubs of integrating and not only protecting traditional communities and indigenous communities, but making them part of the economy in a sustainable way, of course. So we are creating these hubs in the Amazon. As I said before, you can come to copy and you will see one of these hubs there. Because, as I said, this is our approach. We cannot just protect that like a forest. We can protect it, but we can also use it in a sustainable way. So it makes things easier, and in the long run, it's better. So more than that, Brazil has created the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples. It was the first time that we have now just one exclusively ministry just for indigenous people. It's another way to construct ways to valorize and to integrate them in the government, the private sector, etc. And also at G20, it was the first time we had a specific representation from indigenous people. So it's another innovation we had last year. So we are trying to bring, as I said, this perspective of integration, of not working in silos, right? And making everybody part of the solution. Because, as I said before, we are a huge and very complex country. Of course, we are also a huge and very complex world with different contexts and realities. So we have to listen to everybody, and we have to feel that everybody feels like part of the solution and of the process. So we are trying to approach as this way. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Daniel. And Oliver, New Zealand is definitely a country that within the OECD has been also raising the visibility of the question of indigenous agriculture, at least in our Committee for Agriculture. So please, over to you, ask this question or any other question that came up.
Yeah, thank you. I'll touch on this question around indigenous knowledge, and I'll also touch on the question around involving the private sector. So with the situation in New Zealand, it is one of a partnership. It's how the country is worked with a partnership between the Crown and Maori, who are the indigenous population of New Zealand that settled New Zealand hundreds of years before settlers from Europe did. There is still a history of colonialization and displacement. And we have a treaty settlement process that is working its way through, and it has been for a long time. However, what we have seen, and you see this in other situations around the world, is that a lot of, and this is from Maori in New Zealand, is the land that they now have is particularly generally the least productive land. And so what we are having to do is to work with them, and you then get associated socioeconomic challenges because they can't derive the same sort of value from the land that their colonial neighbors once been able to drive. So the treaty settlement process is looking to resolve those issues, but also there is research around thinking around how do we work with this land, because we cannot just leave it to be unproductive. It cannot, for New Zealand as a whole, to be productive and to be prosperous, we cannot have large chunks of land, hundreds of thousands of hectares, just being unproductive. So we have to work with Maori to find solutions for that land, and we look there for traditional knowledge as well. And one example that I would go to is about forestry. And there, our native forests are basically the big lungs of New Zealand's forest. But understanding the unique traditional medicinal properties that those forests have is something that we have not really looked at yet, and we need to look at more. So there's a lot of innovation and conversations that need to happen there. And equally too, that the conversations we often have with Maori take a much longer, multi-generational view. They're thinking about their grandchildren's grandchildren. They have 200 to 500 year plans. That's incredible. So how do we bring that thinking in? Because often we're very short-sighted and we're thinking about the 3 years or trying to hit within the financial year target. They're thinking far beyond, and we need those sorts of solutions that come through as well. So it's not really a full answer for you. It's an area that we have to work hard on. On the involving the private sector, that's a really important part for New Zealand because, as I said before, we don't do public subsidies for farming. New Zealand's banks are really critical to that conversation. One, because the banks are actually heavily invested into New Zealand farming, and vis-a-vis farmers have mortgages that need to be paid every month. Climate change presents a lot of disruption for our farmers and their income, and thus the ability to service debt. The banks have skin in the game. And equally, if we're thinking about bringing in new innovation and technology on farm, the farmers need to have absolute certainty that this bright, shiny idea that you have still means at the end of the month I can make the mortgage payment, or that the bank manager doesn't raise their eyebrows at me and think I'm crazy. So we have to bring this partnership together, and it brings in a different perspective as well. So then I mentioned before we have our Agri-Zero partnership. That has the major New Zealand banks, it has our research institutes, it has our farmers together, and we're looking for those tools that are available for farmers. And then for the banks to get insight that, hey, if this investment is going to happen, we're going to need to help lend to provide that investment to happen. And they need full transparency, the banks, to think about how they make those lending decisions. So it's been a really important aspect for us around bringing banks into the equation to help the change happen.
Thank you, Oliver. And I look forward to your discussion with banks on how to take a 500-year-long time span into their financial calculations. But very interesting points. Before I hand over to Peter, one observation and maybe a moment to pause. You mentioned a term that is important, colonization. So I've asked you, Daniel, to speak about indigenous knowledge, and you, Oliver, because but you have in common that you're in countries that have been colonized at some stage in history. And we see that in our membership that these countries are driving the discussion on indigenous agriculture, and it is not necessarily our members who have been colonizing. So that's my way over to you, Peter. No, not for that question. Before I have you give you the floor, I want also Daniel and Oliver and you, Peter, to prepare for your last 1 minute that I will move into before. And I will go back to the silos and I will ask you which ministries are working together in your country on the topic of bioeconomy. But Peter, what were your answers to the questions that came from the floor?
Well, it was about whether it's the most logical place to grow a certain crop in a certain country. And let me give one example. It's about hemp. So if we grow hemp and it goes to, well, it's a company in the north of the country, he processes it, but he doesn't process it completely. And then it goes to the southern part of Germany, then it comes back, and you send one truck to the southern part, and 8 trucks come back because there's a lot of air in between. So then it becomes much more logic to have this processing done, of course, in Groningen and the north of the country, to have the complete process clear. And in the end, it should be, so the whole chain has to be competitive. So if I look now, we have like 400,000 tons of straw that we actually just use to fertilize the soil with organic matter. If we would take just a part of it, And normally you would get like 50 euro a ton, but now you can get like 150 or even 300 euros sometimes to use it as straw inside a building. I think it just makes sense for a farmer to invest in it, but it means it's a very, in some cases it can be a really short chain. And then I think the other point, which is really interesting, we are just discussing with my colleague here, is about colonization, because like Guido Land here said, if we keep importing, if we are staying at the same consumption level, we have to increase it tenfold. So actually, I think that's just not sustainable. So the discussion in the Netherlands is not yet there on where to limit and how to limit. This, I think, is a completely new question, which is not on the table. We do have the RED, the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive, which is also used for the sustainable, for the bioeconomy. But we don't have any measures except for the ETS, the European Trade System. There is a limit. But I think it was really interesting to see what's going to happen after 2030. Is the ETS going to be put on top of on agriculture as well? Which would mean that actually our carbon credits will become worth even more, because then you can trade them much easier.
Maybe Oliver can give you some stories about that, but I would like to finish. We have a few minutes left, and I would like this maybe to be a call for action. So we heard about silos. We heard that we need to break silos, and we are here. I'm here on a panel with representatives from ministries of agriculture, ministries of foreign affairs. The COP will be led, I assume, by ministries of the environment. You mentioned the ministries for indigenous people. Which ministries are working together towards making the sustainable bioeconomy function in your country? Daniel, 1 minute.
I can tell you it's more than 20. When the ambassador decided to create the initiative at G20, he told us, congrats, you have the initiative and we have to lead it from foreign affairs. And we thought, okay, you have to see which ministry works with this bioeconomy. And we consulted the ministries, and 20 ministries came to the interministerial coordination meeting. And we had to have 3 huge meetings to listen to everybody. And we had 10 official ministries as part of the initiative officially, and more 10 giving feedback, subsides, etc., inputs. So it was a huge coordination. And after that, we had 3 more meetings with civil society, private sector, representatives from big and small companies, and representatives from indigenous peoples and local communities. So we realized that bioeconomy is huge. And we saw that everybody was interested on that. And we saw the same abroad, in other countries. So it makes things easier because you see people interested, but also difficult because everybody wants part of it, you know. So answering more than 20 ministries.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So that must be a huge coordination effort to make that work. Oliver, which ministries are working together in your country on these aspects?
Yeah, you can't really pick a number, because I'll actually go back to how our policy framework works. We have our NDCs. We have an emission reduction plan, which helps chart our path there. And the bioeconomy is critical in the emission reduction plan. And because that's there, it's everyone's job to get working together on bioeconomy. So part of that, though, is also we see a lot of opportunity in trying to, finding productivity and utilizing waste streams. We see that in energy, agriculture, forestry, fish. Everyone has a story like that to say, hey, how can I make my production system more efficient? How can I get these items out of the landfill? How can I be more self-sufficient with the products I have here? And that's kind of where I just, I'd go to the answer that it's not just 2 or 3 agencies. It's like a North Star for us. So it's a call for action in that aspect for New Zealand.
Thank you, Oliver, for your call for action. Peter.
Yeah, we just started with the bioresource strategy, and the Ministry of Agriculture will be the leading one, but we will work together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs of Clean, what's it called again? They keep changing all the names all the time. Clean growth, and also about infrastructure and waterstaat. Sorry, I'm not very good at translating all the names. And so, but I think at some point it really needs to be very concrete, because it's very nice. I'm not so very good at all these high-level stuff. I would like to be really concrete, and then you just make a whole list of interventions for what you want to reach. And then you have to involve many more departments than just your own department. And in the case of the building industry, we have like 4 ministries involved, but it depends on which sector you work on, because if it's in the industry, it might be another sector. But it's much broader than just agriculture.
Thank you, and thank you also for reminding us that indeed coordination important to get a big policy picture right, but it has to be ensured that we can go to the nitty-gritty and make things being concrete. Peter, Daniel, and Oliver, I would like to thank you for these interesting discussions, for these examples of how we can make the sustainable bioeconomy work, for telling us who has to work together. I thank the audience for the questions, and I invite you to give us a last applause to this fantastic panel. Thank you.